Many of you are reading the biography, and particularly Volume 4, which came off the press a month or two ago. And inasmuch as I am just buried in the work of writing, there's not much else we can talk about this afternoon except the biography. And I think perhaps your minds are on that too, so we'll have a good time together in the next 30 minutes. As mentioned, there's a board of trustees. This board of trustees, meeting in San Francisco in the summer of 1950, took an action that there should be written a definitive biography of Ellen G. White. We had life sketches, hastened through the press in a few months' time close to her death, but it's sketches. You'll find whole years that are not even mentioned. You won't even find, believe it or not, you won't even find the Minneapolis Conference of 1888 mentioned in life sketches. Well, there are many, many gaps and many, many things to, to fill in. So it was proposed that a biography be written, and we chose the author, Elder Francis D. Nickel, a member of the Board of Trustees. And work was begun almost instantly.
A little closer to the light.
Yes, surely.
There you go.
If you can't hear me, hold up your hand and I'll try to make it possible for you to hear what I say. I don't want to be here and you not hear what I say. At any rate, we asked Francis Nickel to write the biography. He looked forward to that. He discovered that there were many handwritten documents, particularly in the form of diary materials that needed to be copied, and he said, let's get all the materials ready and before I begin. In the meantime, he was caught up with the commentary, which took his time for a number of years, and really he felt spent when that was done and dreaded the biography. But we were beginning to work on it about 1964, 1965, looking forward to going ahead with the writing, and I would assist him in gathering materials. And then he died suddenly in the late spring of 1966, and our plans that he should write the biography of Ellen White went by the board. He had planned on 2 books of about 800 pages each, and was soon to make a beginning in the writing. Well, when the board next met, we talked about the biography. Who would we get to write it? And someone suggested that perhaps Arthur White should write it. Oh, no, I said. I've been well drilled in the fact that it should not be written by a member of the family. How could they be objective? And so I was not going to undertake writing the biography of Ellen White. But they talked on for a half an hour, and they said, look, now if Nickel wrote it, you'd have to work with him and furnish much of the material. Yes. Well, maybe you better do the writing. You may know more about Ellen White than anybody else. And so I said, no. Only on one condition, because I knew what we'd hear from the field. Yeah, grandson writing the biography, would it be objective? So I said, on only one condition, that the General Conference officers give study to the matter, and if they recommend that I write the biography, I will. It was taken to the officer group. I wasn't there, Elder Pearson was, and others, and they came out at about the same place the trustees did. So the burden of writing the biography was laid upon me in the summer of 1966. And I tried to make a beginning, but I was serving as secretary of the White Estate. Up to that time, for many years, Elder Delafield and I were the only 2 men in the White Estate office, and we had the whole world field, and I was teaching in seminary extension schools and at Andrews, as well as carrying on the regular work of the secretary of the Board of Trustees. So the chapters came very, very slowly. In fact, they were almost non-existent until finally we came to the time when we saw that if we were to get a biography, and I began to get a grasp of the subject, and we'd called Ron Graybell from the West Coast to assist in research, and the task loomed large. So I resigned as secretary of the White Estate. I retired So the records go that I may write the biography of Ellen G. White. And it's been a challenging task. It's been a wonderful task. It's been an enjoyable task to dig into those records that I've never had an opportunity to do before with the regular work of the Secretary of the Board. I suppose some folks have thought that we folk back in the White Estate just, could spend most of our time in research and reading and that kind of thing. And don't you think a minute, because the routine task didn't leave much time for that. So then I could begin really to buckle down to writing the biography of Ellen G. White. We began to think of sources. What would we work from? From memory? Oh, no. If I were to depend upon memory for the biography, you'd get about 1/4 of 1% of what you find in the books today. The biography is based upon the records themselves, the firm published and unpublished manuscript and so on records which we have down through the years. We might speak of the Ellen White diaries. And I hold in my hand here Ellen White's diary, written in Europe. It was a book of lightweight paper with faint lines, which she could carry easily with her. And when it was determined that after attending the council in Basel, Switzerland in 1885, that she should stay on in Europe and visit several of the countries, she went out and bought this little diary, and so that she could make her notations from day to day as had to do with her travels. In fact, she felt the importance of keeping a diary, and this really came home to her in a very definite way when in 1858 she began to write about her own life, and she couldn't remember where she'd been. She couldn't remember the people she'd seen. She couldn't remember the dates or what had happened. So she wrote out to her friends and asked them to write out what they remembered of her experience and send it in. It helped her in getting out the Spiritual Gifts Volume 2, which is a writing of her experience. But beyond that time, she began to keep a diary, just a little 3x5 book, And some days there were so many things happened and the pages were so small that she wrote with such a fine pen and fine writing that we have to get a magnifying glass to read it today. But we find in 1910 in a letter she wrote this: "I've kept up my diary as far as possible in our labors in Australia and in Europe. It would be of service to her, it would be of service in any biographical work, and it certainly is because it becomes basic." So I hold in my hand her little diary, written in Europe. This was only one. There were two of these little books written in Europe in which she noted the places she visited, her experience. And I notice as I turn to the third page here, September 26, 1885, up in the corner it's written, "Rainy morning." And then the next entry, "Rainy morning." So she was noting the weather conditions as well as what she was doing, the work she was doing, and what the Lord was revealing to her. They're rich little books. Now, of course, before we made a beginning on the biography, before Elder Nickel would think of beginning on the biography, all of these materials were typed out, copied out, so that they could be in good form. References could be given, which could be easily found, and so on. Then, of course, there were her letters. Now, these are very valuable because she mentions in them activities and rights of experience and so on. I picked up a pocket for 1857, and this is minuscule besides the pockets when we come to the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, when we'd have 2 to 3 inches of material. But this is where I'm going to be working in the next few weeks, and I brought this down with me. January 28, 1857, in a vision given at this place, I was shown something concerning you, she writes. Brother Rhodes, July 19, I've written to Brother Edson the general part of a vision for the church in New York given in Pennsylvania. Another, Brother Uriah Smith. While at Monterey, we had a most powerful meeting. The Spirit of the Lord rested upon me. I was shown in vision many things. Was shown the straightness of the way, the necessity of each understanding their own heart, the danger of deceiving themselves. And I could go on and on and on as these letters mention the visions and their work and their burdens and so on. The Review and Heralds also are rich sources of material, reports of meetings and what other people wrote. I have before me something written by Louisa Morton, published in the Review in 1857. And she tells here, at the last meeting, Sister White was taken off in vision, and it was the most solemn scene I ever witnessed. It has made an impression on my mind that can never be erased while reason and life remain. Now, you see, in the later years I've been dealing with, well, the visions were usually given during the hours of the night. When we get back into these earlier years, we're finding many of the visions accompanied by the physical phenomena, and that becomes, of course, of great interest to us. And in the Review and Herald, the reports of meetings that were held, and I could go on and on. Well, these are the kind of sources that we work with. Then, of course, there are such materials as the letters received by Ellen White and the office staff down through the years. The letters written by James White, not so many, but significant. The letters written by W.C. White, 30,000 letters. Of course, he was engaged in many lines of work, and only a relatively small proportion relate to the kind of things we're interested in. But these materials all form a part of the basis that we work on as we work on the biography. Now, when I've gotten into the routine of this, and it's taken me time to do this, this is the way I work. I try to write a chapter a week. I've promised the publishers a manuscript a year. There are 32 to 34 chapters in a manuscript. And if I'm going to keep up with the schedule, with all the proofreading I've got to do and the checking and the choosing of illustrations and all that goes with the publishing of books, I've got to work to a schedule of just about a chapter a week. So Saturday night after the Sabbath, I usually begin. Taking up a new subject, I'll pick up the biographical cards. These were cards which were made by Bessie Mount when we began the project, noting every day when we had a knowledge of what Ellen White did and where she was. A very rich file, fills 2 sections of a card file drawer. And as I look through these cards for a given year, I can see the principal points that are be dealt with. Now, I'm not writing a day-by-day chronicle, as you've discovered, for Ellen White lived and worked for 25,000 days. But I must pick out in any given year that I'm dealing with, and I may devote 2 chapters to a year. 2 15-page chapters is the basis of my work, if we keep it within the limits of the book, and the publishers set that. And so then I'll pick out in a given year the principal points that make a representative story interesting, enlightening, and typical, so that working over a period of years we'd get a great variety of materials presented. So Saturday night I begin to look this over, and I make up my mind, now on this particular year, this is what I'm going to stress, and this, and this. Then I pick up the manuscripts and the letters, and the periodical articles that may relate to this, and spend the next 3 days in going through these. And I will type out on 4 by 6 slips of paper, not cards, they're too thick. 4 by 6 slips of paper, I will type out the principal points that are brought out in these documents, the principal quotations that especially express and give the fine feeling of Ellen White that I'll work with. The subject, I put at the top, the date, the source reference. And believe me, that's important. You don't know how many hours we spend trying to find some that we forget to put in. At any rate, when I get ready, when we get normal years, I've had it, we might have, inch and a half slips, 100, 150, maybe more. And then I'll draw these into the areas that I'm going to cover. And by Wednesday, I'm usually ready to write. I lay out the principal quotations that I want to bring in that'll enrich it, help you know Ellen White. And then sit down at the Royal Manual typewriter. And how thankful I am I took typing at PUC when I was going to school up there. Type it out on yellow paper. You know how it is. You'll start it, and you think this is pretty good. In fact, in the middle of the night, I've thought out this leading line, because you know how it is with a chapter in a book as it is with a sermon. You make up your mind whether it's worth listening to by the first few lines you read. And then I'll type it out with these sources in front of me. Then I'll say, well, that isn't the way I want to say it. So I'll pull the sheet out of the machine, cut it in half, and start another sheet, staple it on, and go on and on and on and on until I get the copy ready for a chapter. As I say, I try to do a chapter a week. Don't always succeed, but that's my goal. Then I turn this over to my secretary, and she's very adept at reading my poor typing and my handwriting, for I've edited, of course. And she types it out, gets it ready, types it out on the word processor. That makes it easy to correct later on. And so the chapters are done week by week, turned out, ready for her copying and to go to the publisher. I usually begin my work early in the morning. I've always liked to work early in the morning. So about 5 o'clock, I'll be up and beginning to write. And when you wake up about that time in the morning, won't you say a prayer for me? I need the help. I couldn't do this alone. It's too stupendous. And what a responsibility, representing to the church and the world the work of the messenger of the Lord. I tell you, it does not rest lightly with me as I think of that responsibility. What shall I bring in? Am I giving this a representative turn, a fair turn? Have I chosen the right quotations? I often sense the presence of the Spirit of God as I labor. Pray for me. It's a great privilege. Now we have volumes 5 and 6 came out first, and people will get a bit confused because why in the world did you begin at the end, and why didn't you begin in the beginning? Well, this was a decision we had to make. I didn't make it on the basis of publication. I made it on the basis of writing. We called Ron Graybill to come back and work with us. He could talk with people in California that had known Sister White, and he did. And then we thought this would be a little more relevant, a little more close to her day, rather than to go back at the beginning. And then another thing. In Life Sketches and Spiritual Gifts, Volume 2, and some other books, Testimonies, Volume 1, you have her early life experience portrayed quite well. But as I mentioned, when it came to her later life, very, very little. So I thought, well, this is a big job. I'm going to begin where it isn't so well covered. And so we decided to begin with the time she came from Australia, picking it up with the Elmshaven years, as you've read. And you know, after we got the manuscript written, and we're about ready to well, we didn't know just what we should do with it. Perhaps put it in the hands of the publishers, even though it was volume 5. And then we discovered how appropriate so much of the material was by issues which were arising just at that time. You know what I'm talking about. And so it seems we felt it's in the providence of God that we began where we did. And we have volume 5 and 6 out, the early Elmshaven years, the later Elmshaven years. I had to divide Ellen White's life into 6 eras because there were 6 volumes. I would like to have had 7. Publishers says 6. They know what they can sell. And so we divided her life into 6 eras, as you've seen. And then the next volume to come out was the Australian years, which you have seen. And it covers from 1891 to 1900. Then I've just turned over the manuscript to the publishers on June 10 for the lonely years. These begin with 1876, run into the period of the later years of James White at times when he was not well. The problems of retirement as they were faced by James White, that's not easy. Not easy for a man that's been with the thing from its very beginning days, and he knew the cause from its beginning to its end, and it was difficult for James White to retire. The story's all told in the manuscript. And then, of course, the loneliness that came, for Ellen White really leaned on him in so many ways, not for her messages, but for encouragement and assistance. And then through the difficult years of the 1888 experience, and I've sometimes said we could have gone through the 1888 experience with issues other than that of righteousness by faith. Because you get right down to the nitty-gritty, very largely were attitudes towards the spirit of prophecy. And it was all tied in. They were mixed. There were many issues. It was a lonesome time for Ellen White. Well, at any rate, that volume will be off the press, if the Lord wills, and everything goes well, by April or May next year. And so about this time next year, you'll be reading that. In the meantime, I will have written the early years, if the Lord gives me health as He has done. And I thank God for the health He's given me. Some of you know I stood at the brink a few years ago. I had a heart infection which came about as the result of a congenital defect in my heart. It wasn't discovered what caused it until Dr. Hughes cut it open, and took a look inside. But with a new valve, the aortic valve, and a couple of 3 bypasses, and following very, very carefully the counsel that we were given at the St. Helena Sanitarium on the matter of cardiac rehabilitation. And they put on the program, and I was the first one to register for the program as put on there, a 3-week in-house program. And it changed our way of life. And Frida and I are determined to follow that way of life and feel that we must if we're to expect God's blessing in this project in which I'm engaged. And I owe it to the Lord, to the church, to the publishers, to get out these books. And I want you to pray that the Lord will give me strength and health. But I'm feeling well, write 7 or 8 hours a day, and so I'm getting on very, very well with that. Well, you may say, what has this done to you, Arthur White? To go into these sources, to dig into the very heart of everything. It's been a thrilling experience. I haven't found a thing to cover up. The story is there. I've tried to tell it as it is. You've seen it. You've seen me portray Ellen White's weaknesses as well as her strengths. You'll see me portray James White's weaknesses as well as his strengths. You know, I didn't have such a difficult time relating to this task to work objectively as some thought I might have, and I've seen some letters that were written after it was decided that I should write the biography. But when I worked with my father in the Ellen G. White estate, and I joined him in 1929, a year after I came out of PUC, and worked with him for 9 years as his secretary, and then when he died, I was chosen to fill his place on the Board of Trustees and was chosen as the Secretary of the White Estate, an office I held for 40 years. But I had to determine how would I relate myself to this, to Ellen White. And I determined that if my work was to be effective, I must relate myself to it as would any Seventh-day Adventist, not as to my grandmother. Now, you understand, I have reason for pride in the fact that Ellen White was my grandmother. But in all through my ministry, I've endeavored to relate myself to it as would John Hancock, Elder Delafield, Elder Pearson, Elder Wilson, anybody else. And that has made it, I think, easier to be objective in the biography. And I've been trying to do that. Now, what have I noticed? Oh my, I've got to stop right away. Give me just a minute or two. One was the total dedication of Ellen G. White. Just absolutely total dedication. Now, she was a mother in the home with her children, washing the clothes and the dishes in the earlier years, and doing the sewing and caring for the children. But there was a total dedication to this task as the messenger of the Lord. And of course, as the family responsibilities dropped off, she had more time for that. Another point that I've seen is her dependence on God. A total dependence on God. A sense of her insufficiency. A sense that she must constantly depend upon God. There were times she had decisions to make, and hard decisions. You've read about them in Volume 5. Should she go to the General Conference of 1901 or shouldn't she? And other questions. And the Lord didn't give her an immediate answer. She had to think things through and make decisions. And the Lord gave her light, which helped to confirm it. I've observed that there was an absolute, total confidence in the certainty of the message. Just no question. Whether it's doctrine, or guidance, or messages of correction, just a confident certainty. No misgivings. And if she was ever tempted to have some questions when criticism was rife, and we've had it all through the years. Friends, the things you've seen through the last year or two are not new to you, but they're not new. We've had them all through the years. And Ellen White would go back in her mind and review her experience and God's providences, and that brought confidence to her heart. She never doubted. Confidence in the triumph of the message. She was absolutely confident in that. This message would triumph. It was God's work. It would not fail. I've been impressed with the frequency of the visions. Now, this has been an interesting study to me all through the years. But I was impressed with it particularly in writing on the Australian years, the book you've just gotten. How many times visions were given to her in Australia, usually in the hours of the night, guiding almost from day to day, sometimes a vision for each day's activities. I've talked of 2,000 visions, and that was based, through the years, and Hetty Jemison, who's here, will remember that very well, the Delafield, figuring a vision at the rate of about 1 in 2 weeks. And I think this is about right. I'm talking about the visions of the night as well as the visions of the day. But I think now maybe this figure is even conservative. One thing that I've been impressed with is Ellen G. White's confidence in her associate workers, even though they erred, even though they failed. She believed in their sincerity. She had confidence in them. You'll run across that when you read the story of Anna Phillips in the Australian years. And there were two leading men who were swept off their feet by Anna Phillips. A.T. Jones and W.W. Prescott, two stalwart leaders of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, were swept off by the work of this false prophet. And Ellen White had to write some things, and she did. But then she wrote of her confidence in these men, that they were men of God. And even though they'd failed, even though they'd been tripped up, they were the men of God. She had confidence in them. You know, there was opened up to her so many times the inner lives of individuals, the sins of individuals, things not known to anyone but God and these individuals. Sometimes I wonder how she could ever have confidence in humanity at all. She kept these things to herself. She didn't expose them to others unless they were generally known. The White Estate's under criticism. I'm under criticism right now because through the years we haven't opened the files open to everyone and let them read everything they want to read of all the personal testimonies to this brother and that brother. We haven't done it and we're not going to do it. She didn't do it. There's no good to be accomplished by it. But the materials, the files in general are rich in materials that serve the church continually well. One thing that has impressed my heart very, very much as I've been doing the writing is not only her concern that the people who have given their hearts to the Lord and have joined the church were really getting ready to meet the Lord. And I tell you, that is something that has burdened me a great deal. It's true, these testimonies are written in years gone by and addressed to individuals who we may not know. But the great adversary is the same. The principles of the temptations are the same. They haven't changed. We may think we've come to a different new age now, and everybody's well, no one needs any word of caution or counsel. But sometimes we can see that they would do well to study some of these counsels if we're really getting ready to meet the Lord. If we're really getting ready. Has my research uncovered things which would lead to questions? Do I have the satisfactory answer to all questions? No, I don't. There's some things I'm waiting till we get over on the other side to find out about. But friends, they're so insignificant and so few, and my comprehension is so dull and so limited that I'm not going to pass judgment. Time stop. All right, I will.
Finish your sentence, Brother White. Finish your thought.
All right. Well, these are things that have impressed me as I have been writing.
Amen.
And I'm writing, trying to write in a way that you'll not only discover a lot of denominational history, but that you'll become so well acquainted with Ellen White that you feel, as one conference president wrote to me, I feel that I've walked with her, I've talked with her, I've prayed with her, and I know Jesus better.
Yes, people ask me often. I'm at Elmshaven, hostess there every other day. I'm on duty Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday, and we're all on duty Sabbath. We have many, many people coming to Elms Haven all through the week. The only time we don't want you to come, and that's Friday afternoon. Please stay away. We have to get ready for Sabbath. And people ask me, well, what kind of a person was Ellen White as a person? You know, she was a writer. She was a wonderful speaker. But what kind of a person was she? So I'll try to tell you a few little stories that might illustrate what kind of a person Ellen White was. She was a very cheerful person. She was a little person, 5'2", dark hair most of the time. She didn't turn gray early as her husband turned gray. And unfortunately, all 7 of her grandchildren got the white genes, not the Harmon genes. We all turned gray early. She was small hands, dainty hands, very competent hands. She sewed. She made the little boys' suits, and she had 4 little boys. She even made their caps for the boys. She liked to crochet. She crocheted rugs, and she braided rugs. Now, as a young woman, she braided nice rugs. Being slight, and only, I suppose, when she was married, weighed between 80 and 90, real slight as a young woman. And she would make these big rugs and wasn't too strong. I didn't know how to live in those days. She thought she had to have meat twice a day for strength, but she was fainting often, so it didn't give her the strength she hoped it would give her. It wasn't until her vision of 1836, no, what was it, 63? I got my numbers reversed, that she found out how she should live. No, what was it, 18 what? That's right, 1863. And she tried to follow it out, and her health improved marvelously. And when I remember her, I suppose she was 75 when I first remember her. She was going up and down those 22 steps, because Elms Haven ceilings are high. It's 22 steps from the first floor to the second. And she was going up and down without any help. She was going off to camp meetings. She was rushing down to Loma Linda to help them get going. I don't know how she stood up under her program. In the earlier days, they spaced the camp meetings so that James and Ellen could always be present at camp meeting. How would you like to live out of a suitcase several months in the summertime? They always had a tent right next to the big tent that the Whites went to. They would have that ready for them, and they knew where they could go. But it was hard to live out of a suitcase so long. It's astounding how she stood up under that terrific load. But I'm thinking of her personality. She was friendly, cheerful. She would greet you with a smile. She never shaded other people's lives with her burdens or her aches and pains. Very cheerful person. And she had what I call dispatch. She was little, never seemed to be in a hurry, but things got done. She was orderly. Tremendous correspondence was kept in a letter file, alphabetically arranged. She put things away where she could find them. I haven't learned that yet. I put them away so well, I never find them again, some of them. But I did learn some things through grandmother that were very well worthwhile. She was a gracious hostess, company all the time. Her house was a free hotel. Now, in her later years, she did not cook herself. In the early years, yes. But when she came, well, I think even in Australia, she had someone that helped her with the cooking so that she could get Desire of Ages finished. And when we came to Elms Haven, she had a cook come in and get the meals. And Miss McInturfer, who had been with the Whites many years, served as, I would say, stewardess those 15 years. Her bedroom was down on the first floor so that she could answer the doorbell. She planned the meals and housed the guests. So Ellen White didn't have to think of that, which was a great relief to her. But when she was young, she did do the cooking for groups. For instance, one time, Ellen White was very fond of going outdoors. She liked to go camping. And she also recommended that we go camping. And in many years later, after she went camping, I remember one time my father told about them going camping in Colorado. He was a teenager. The other two boys had died, and Edson was married. And so they went camping with Will and her husband and a woman by the name of, I'll tell you in a minute, Lucinda Hall was a very dear friend of Grandmother's, and she went camping with them way up in the mountains of Colorado. They had an interesting time. I'd like to tell you that story, but I don't have time. The buggy broke down, the wagon did, and they had to get on horseback, and Grandmother had to get on horseback to go the rest of the way where they were to camp. And the horse stumbled in a gopher hole or something like that and threw her, and her head struck on a rock. Well, they quickly put cold on it, but now if it had been me, I'd been scared to get back on again. But she did. She got back on again and went on the rest of the way. There was nothing scary about Ellen White. She loved to go sailing in a sailboat, and I can't stand them. They tip too much. But she enjoyed it. They'd go out when the office was in Oakland and the Pacific Press was in Oakland, and they'd say, let's have a day off, and they'd hire a boat and go out in a sailboat out the Golden Gate, you know. Well, when they get outside the Golden Gate, the waves are pretty high, and many of the people, they'd rush inside. But not Ellen. She'd stand out there and enjoy the splash of the water. She says it's glorious, grand. I think I'd be the one that went inside. I don't like sailboats anyway. They tip too much. But she wasn't a scary person at all. She handled horses. She was not afraid when she went sailing, and she just enjoyed being outdoors, and she enjoyed the scenery in Europe very much. The beauties of the Alps, she just, well, we would say raved about it, but that isn't the right word to use. She enjoyed it so very, very much. Now, she counseled that we go camping, and she did not go during the last 15 years, but she counseled that the family go. I wish people would stress more what Ellen White says about heads of families taking a day or maybe a week off and taking their family and going an outing. You don't hear people quote that much of Ellen White's writings, but it's there. When they were in Oakland one time, they had been working very hard in the press, and she said, don't you want it? Wouldn't it be nice if we had a day off? And so they hitched up the horses and drove up into the hills by Oakland, and fortunately, it was strawberry time, and the wild strawberries are getting ripe. So my father and the others, they picked the strawberries and brought them in for the dinner, and they thought, now we wish we had some cream. And so they hunted around, and they found a farmer, and they said, can we buy some cream? And they said, yes. And so they sold them some cream. And for dessert for their lunch, they had strawberries and cream. The doctors wouldn't like the cream nowadays, would they? Well, we used some cream. We were moderate in the use of things like that, but not extreme. They enjoyed their strawberries and cream that time that they went out on an outing in Oakland. She loved children. She loved the horses. She took good care of the horses. She had animals. I remember one dog we had was called Tiglis Paleser, quite a long name, but he didn't get to come in the house. He was just a farm dog. I don't remember her keeping pets in the house, except canary birds. And she had two cages with canary birds in the kitchen. Now, we scalded our milk because they didn't test for Bang's disease or tuberculosis in those days. We scalded it in big pans and took it down in the basement in the cellar, which was always nice and cool. And we had a screened-in cooler there. And the next morning, there'd be these nice slabs of cream. And we used that on our bread and things instead of butter. And who'd want butter if you had nice cream? But we used to you can't pour slabs of cream on your hot cereal in the morning. And we always had a hot cereal in the morning with 3 kinds of fruit, more or less. And so we'd whip this cream with an egg beater with a little milk so we could pour it from a pitcher on our hot cereal. And the minute those canaries heard the beater start turning, they sang for all they were worth. So she enjoyed pets. She enjoyed the things about her. And we children enjoyed being with her. We always spent Friday night, Sabbath, and Saturday night at grandmother's. That's after we moved out. We all were in that house when we first came from Australia. That house that the Lord had all ready for her, completely furnished, completely landscaped, rugged, everything. We just moved in 2 weeks probably after we were from Australia, with very close to 2 weeks. We were all settled in that house. There were beds everywhere because we were a big family. But she gave my father 7 acres of land. And she said, this is the children's playground and schoolroom. Don't sell it. And a stream ran through it. And we had a lovely time on those 7 acres. And we had grandmother's farm. In addition, we were not fenced in by any manner of means. We had such a happy time. And Ellen White was very understanding with children. I don't know if she ever took a psychology class, but her psychology with children was very good. We sat still at worship, just as still as in church. You know how long it lasted? Not more than 10 minutes. She knew that a children's attention span is not very long, or even when the children weren't there, worship was just about 10 minutes. Ellen would read the scripture. One of the ministers would pray if there was some of them there. Then we'd sing a hymn. We always sang a hymn at worship, both morning and evening. Ellen felt the time for long study and long prayers was by yourself, not with the family. And so we loved worship. For Sabbath, we always decorated. We had lots of wildflowers, and we would decorate flowers on the mantelpiece, flowers on the buffet, and a big bouquet in the center of the table. The table was nicely set, always nicely set, arranged. And there was nothing unpleasant to be said at the table. If you didn't like something, you didn't say a word, you just didn't eat it. And we weren't made, they didn't save like some parents do. If you don't eat it now, you'll have to have it tomorrow. I never heard anything like that when I was young. But we had to taste at least taste everything, but we didn't have to eat a lot of it if we didn't want to. Well, after tasting so and so many times, you decide you like it. For instance, I didn't like green peas of all things. Why? Because they were sweet, and I like salty things. But I learned to like green peas. I had to eat 2 or 3 each time, but not anymore. So we had happy times at the table, pleasant, cheerful times, and that's good psychology too for your health. Be happy at the table. Maybe our manners weren't always the best, but we were not corrected at the table. We were talked about it some other time. You just don't do that way at the table. Okay.
Thank you. How many of you want to say thank you to Grace Jacques? Thank you, Sister Jacques.
Well, we had a lovely time,
Yes.
a happy time growing up. And she said, make it easy for children to obey. And I think as parents, we have to think of that. You can make it easy and you can make it hard. Okay, which way?
Okay. That's a privilege. Oh, pardon me.
I'm very happy to have this privilege of being with my brother. He went to Washington, D.C. in 1937 when my father passed away. He's been there. I've been in California, not at Elm Savin all the time. So we really don't know each other too well.
We'll get acquainted.
We're going to get acquainted.
Just a minute. We want to put the mic down. Just one more. Thank you.
Okay?
Thank you. Let me help you here.
Yes.